On today's show, we will spotlight 10 starting pitchers the New York Mets could target at the trade deadline.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to get parts fast. Shop for your next plumbing, h-vac, or electrical job and get fast shipping from coast to coast at SupplyHouse.com. What is amazing how much narratives can change ahead of the trade deadline. On Friday night, there was a point where the New York Mets looked like a surefire team that was absolutely going to make the playoffs. They were on their way to beating the Braves in a series. They took each of the first two games. And during that second game on Friday night, the Mets piled on 7 runs against Charlie Morton. You had Kodai Senga looking amazing, looking like the ace that could carry the Mets to the promised land. And then he pulled a calf muscle. And all of a sudden, things have just not been going well for the Mets. They lose the final 2 games of that series for the Braves, as the Braves just have a brief cameo in third place before they grab second place from the Mets in the NL East. And now end up right where they started at the beginning of this series, a game and a half up. And the Mets spot is still very much tenuous, okay? You're sitting there right behind the Padres now, even who passed the Mets. Now they're in the third wild card spot. You have the Diamondbacks behind you. Cardinals are still in the race. A lot of teams are still in this race. Cubs, Giants, Pirates. There's so much that can still change, and it changes on an hourly basis at the deadline. The Chicago Cubs today get Isaac Paredes. Now, does that mean that they're going to go all in at this deadline? No, it's probably a piece that not only helps them this year, but it's more a long-term add to help their team. But it just shows you how anything could really happen for these teams. If Paredes gets going with that lineup and they get healthy, maybe the Cubs make a run. There's just so much that's at stake right now. And a couple losses in a row really change how you feel about a team. I'm not going to jump off the bandwagon by any stretch of the imagination, but it does illustrate that there is a definite need that the Mets have to address, and that's their starting rotation, or at least their pitching staff as a whole. We've been talking about the last couple of days as I've done shows over the weekend. I think the Mets are in a position right now where they have to be scouring the market for any pitching help possible, and the way I view it, either you aggressively address your bullpen and you put Jose Butto back in the rotation, or you find a starting pitcher that can replace Tyler McGill, because this rotation, it doesn't look like a playoff rotation just yet. And the hope was with Kodai Senga, you were there. That was going to be the piece that was going to make it all work for you. Luis Severino, that's a playoff pitcher. Sean Manaea, maybe is a playoff pitcher. Jose Quintana, maybe. David Peterson, everyone who's been listening to the show for a while knows how much I love him, and he looked great through the first 3 innings today. But he had a rough 4th inning where he gave up 4 runs, 3-run homer to Matt Olson, then he walked in a run. It was a brutal inning for him. Now he came back out in the 5th, put up a 0, looked good. Even with that, though, you had David Peterson giving up 4 runs and showing that he might not be ready to be that starter that you can hand the ball to in the playoffs. So it's still an issue trying to figure out what the Mets are going to do here. Do they have a good enough lineup to make their way into the postseason and even make a run when they get there? Absolutely. Can they patch together a bullpen? I think so. But that rotation is a real question. Now, the reason why they lost this series, or not lost the series, they split the series, but when you win the first 2 and lose the second 2, sometimes it can feel like a loss. But the reason why they let that series get away from them is because the bats went cold. The Braves did a great job pitching the last couple days, and that's why the Mets were unable to get that third victory. The Braves, as frustrating the years they're having, they still have a winning DNA. And we saw it. And that pedigree, ultimately, if you had to look at these 2 teams and you had to pick which one's more likely to make the playoffs, that's why most evaluators would still say the Braves. Even if you look at the Mets lineup on paper and say, oh, that's better, the Braves just have the pitching. And again, they have the track record. So it just, to me, illustrates that need even further. The Mets went 1 for 9 with runners in scoring position in this game. They had their opportunities. They just didn't come through. Now, I will say, as we're now a little bit removed from the Jesse Winker trade, and I didn't get a chance to break down the return on yesterday's show, I have liked what the Mets have done at this deadline up to this point, because to get Jesse Winker, all they gave up was Tyler Stewart. Now, I put a list together that I sent the Locked On Mets insiders when I was on my flight on Friday. That's, of course, our texting service. And I also shared that with you guys after that first trade of acquiring Ryan Stanek. And of the players on that list, let me pull it up again. I've talked about it before, but I'll reiterate it real quick here. 2 of them have already been dealt, which shows you that these are the pieces the Mets are looking to shop. And that's the way I framed the list. Prospects that I'd be ready to sell, prospects that I think the Mets are shopping to improve their team that they're not going to really feel in the future. So that list included Kevin Parada, Alex Ramirez, Marco Vargas, Ron Hernandez, Nick Morabito, Tyler Stewart, Mike Vasil, Dom Hamill, Rylan Thomas, Joander Suarez. Thomas, a ceiling of a 4th outfielder, he goes in the Stanek trade, and now Tyler Stewart goes in the Jesse Winker trade. And to me, that makes this a much better deal, because while Tyler Stewart is a really nice prospect, a great story for the Mets when it comes to a development where I think he was, a 9th round pick or maybe an 11th round pick. He was leading the minor leagues in ERA last year and, put his name on the map this season. 3.96 ERA in 17 starts in Double-A, 90 strikeouts and 84 innings pitched. I do think there's upside. I get why the Nationals jumped on this trade now, because they found a prospect that they probably deemed a guy that could be in their rotation in a couple of years. And so they decided to go for it. And I don't think that this is nothing, but for a player of Jesse Winker's caliber with the season that he's having, to give up a guy that is probably maybe the 6th or the 7th best pitching prospect in your system, if you're still including Christian Scott, it's Scott, Sproat, Jonah Tong, Blade Tidwell, probably still Mike Vasil and Dom Hamill before you get to Stewart. It made a lot of sense to make this move. I'd even say that a Cade Morris might be a higher valued prospect to the Mets than Tyler Stewart. So you make this deal, and I do believe that Jesse Winker is going to fit like a glove. Seeing him talk today, understanding some of the relationships he has in that clubhouse, playing on the travel baseball circuit with Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor, playing, I think, with Lindor against Alonso in his youth, playing with Jose Iglesias in Cincinnati. There's a lot of connections in that clubhouse. He seems like a great clubhouse guy. I think he's going to make this team better. And that was a great way to accomplish, I think, your only real need for the lineup. With Jesse Winker, you now have multiple options. Jesse Winker could be your starting left fielder with Nimmo in center, Jeff McNeil in right. Bader can be in center, Winker can be in right, Nimmo can be in left. Not the best defensive outfield, but it can still work for you. When Marte comes back, he can be in the fold. If Iglesias stops hitting, McNeil can slide back to second. That just solved an issue where now the Mets have one focus in mind, and that is addressing this pitching staff. So if they decide to get a starting pitcher instead of a reliever, who could be some of those targets? We're going to talk about that. And also I want to address the bullpen a little bit here. Are the Mets set in the bullpen if they land a big-time starting pitcher? So we'll talk about both of those things in the next segment, start running through candidates. Before we get into that, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode of Locked On Mets is brought to you by Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, size, and budget, and they do all the shopping for you. It's the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. All you got to do is give your stylist the size, style, and budget preferences, and then you order boxes when you want, how you want them. No subscriptions are required. They'll just send you 5 just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. You keep what works for you, you send back the rest. Personally, I don't like going to the store, going into fitting rooms, trying on clothes. That whole process to me, just never something that I enjoyed personally. Now with Stitch Fix, it's so much easier for me to shop because I just get a box in the mail. I try things on in the comfort of my home. And if I like a piece, I keep it. And most of the time, I'm going to like at least one thing they send me. A lot of times I find myself liking the whole box. But even if I don't, I send everything back in the mail, hassle-free. They handle it all for you. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/MLB and get $20 off your first fix. That's stitchfix.com/MLB for $20 off. stitchfix.com/MLB. Must redeem within 7 days of sign up. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where we get updates from me anytime some news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also get the lineup graphics sent to your phone every day so you know who's in the Mets starting nine without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, do the Mets have enough in their bullpen? I know that's a crazy sentence to say considering what we were talking about a week ago, where the only thing I thought the Mets needed to address was their bullpen, but things can change drastically. The Kodai Senga injury, the Christian Scott injury, seeing David Peterson with a rougher start, Tyler McGill coming back into the rotation, having another clunker, it just illustrates that need. And starting pitching is more important always than relief help. And right now, the market for relievers is crazy. And Andy Martino put a report out tonight just that the Mets have been taken aback by just the insane asking prices across the board when it comes to pitching, where teams are asking for the moon, the sun, the stars, and they have every right to, but that makes it very hard to make additions. What we've seen up to this point is the Mets are still prioritizing the future. They have not made a trade that has hurt them yet. With Stanek, it was Rylan Thomas, as I said, guy that has a fourth outfielder ceiling. Tyler Stewart, his ceiling might be a fifth starter, a back end guy. I'd say the top end is he's a middle of the rotation guy, but more likely settles in to be maybe something similar to what Tyler McGill has become. Maybe he pitches a little bit better than that. Maybe it's McGill's best outcome, but still, the trade Tyler Stewart, it doesn't hurt you long term when you have so many more starting pitchers in your farm system that have more value. Now, to get Phil Maton, it was a player to be named later, or it might have just been cash. We still don't know the final return there. So they have not given up a significant prospect to address this current roster. Now, that can still come, but would you rather that be for a starting pitcher or a reliever? And that's, I think, the give and take here. You look at where the Mets are at with their bullpen. Edwin Diaz, Phil Maton, Ryan Stanek are the guys that are going to be there. Stanek, rough first appearance, gives up home runs, gets booed. Not how you want to make your introduction. I still think he'll be fine. Jose Butto has been great in that bullpen, but he's in a very interesting spot where I feel like if the market, as I already said, gets too crazy on the starters and you can get some relief help, maybe you slide him back into the rotation, because the way Butto has pitched at times, I feel more confident in him taking the ball in a playoff game, as funny as it is to say, than a Quintana or a Peterson at times, just because Butto has looked really good throughout stretches this year. Now, he's looked elite in the bullpen and looked solid in the rotation. And I think the Mets sort of understand that. They have found a role that's working for him. And I think they probably view Jose Butto and say, well, if he's in a rotation, we don't really know what that's going to look like. Stretching him back out again as a relief option right now, he is someone that we really trust in high leverage situations. And to get a guy of his caliber in the bullpen might be a lot harder than to get a guy of his caliber in the rotation if you still are looking at him as more of a back-end starter as opposed to potentially being a lockdown reliever. So with that said, if they're going to keep Butto in the bullpen, you have Diaz, Maton, Butto, Stanek all set right now. You still have Ottavino and Diekman, and I think those are the guys that would eventually lose roster spots when you get other guys healthy. Alex Young looks like a find in the bullpen as maybe the left-hander reliever you've been searching for all year. So if the Mets have confidence in that, they still have Matt Gage in the minor leagues that they picked up off of waivers. There's still options there. Then all of a sudden, if Young is a guy that you really feel good about, as well as the other potential of Danny Young, maybe you don't need a left-hander reliever. So Diaz, Maton, Butto, Stanek, Young. Sean Reed-Foley had a rehab appearance on Sunday in Brooklyn. Didn't go great. He got the first two outs. Then he gave up a hit, walked a batter, threw a wild pitch to put two runners in scoring position. Gave up another hit, which scored both of those runs. Ends up getting pulled from there, having only recorded 2 outs on 23 pitches, 13 of them being strikes. But at least he's healthy pitching in games. And with Reed Garrett, he's going to face hitters soon, and he could be on a rehab assignment this week as well. So if you get those two guys back, if Daniel Nunez really isn't on the IL for long, you can envision a pretty good bullpen. If Maton and Stanek work, if Diaz keeps pitching like he has as of late in that bullpen, Budo holds things up. You have Garrett, you have Sean Reed-Full, you have Nunez, you have Alex Young. All of a sudden, that's an 8-man pen right there. So maybe the Mets view that as less of a need, and adding a starting pitcher becomes more of a priority. With that said, we've talked about some names this weekend. Blake Snell, spent a lot of time on him. I'm actually going to write an article as soon as I'm done with the show tonight for justbaseball.com. And that's really going to dive into, Snell's situation a lot and why I believe that is the pie in the sky to shoot for, right? That's the guy to trade significant prospects for if you have to trade for, or if you're going to make a blockbuster deal, that's the guy the Mets should push the chips forward for. But if it's not him, Eric Fetty, clearly a big name on the market. Jack Flaherty is another one. Garrett Crochet, Chris Bassett. There's a lot of names. So I've actually divided these names into 3 different camps. Most likely to be moved pitchers, biggest impact arms, and then we're going to talk about in the final segment today, under the radar trade targets that the Mets could grab. So let's start with the most likely pitchers to be moved. And to me, Eric Fetty will get traded. He's going to get moved. Here's the problem with Eric Fetty. Everybody wants him. It's crazy for a guy that was out of the league and in the KBO, but he came back stateside. It was between the White Sox and the Mets in free agency. He chose Chicago. He's been very solid throughout the season. The Cardinals really want him. The Brewers have shown interest. The Dodgers, I think, have shown some interest, although now the latest report I saw was a 3-team trade that was going to send Tommy Edman to the Dodgers potentially, and Fetty, going to the Cardinals, and then maybe prospects going to the White Sox. Who knows what happens there? But the problem with Eric Fetty to me is just that the market is going to get out of hand here because he's only making $15 million over these 2 seasons. So next year, $7.5 million is extremely affordable for a quality starting pitcher. We saw Severino get 14, Minaya get around that same number, but on a multi-year deal. Frankie Montes get that same number. I mean, the going rate for just a viable starting pitcher, Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson as well, was at least $10 million, as much as $15 million. You're looking at a guy that's making half of that potentially in Fetty. That's really attracted to these teams that are still looking for starting pitching help. So I think Fetty is going to net a team a crazy return. Eric Fetty might get more for the White Sox than Blake Snell gets for the Padres, and that's why he's going to move, and Blake Snell might not. Because the Giants could ultimately decide, you know what, let's hang on to Snell, and let's just go for it. Let's just ride out what we got, and if Blake Snell pitches really well for us, well, then we're going to be in the race. If he doesn't, well, he's going to come back next year, and we'll try it again. So I think you compare those pitchers, that's why Fetty is the most likely to be moved. There's no reason for the White Sox to keep him. Snell, you really don't know. Another pitcher that is in the most likely to be moved is Jack Flaherty, because he's a rental. No reason to keep him if you're the Tigers. Yes, they are sort of still in the race, playing some decent baseball out of the break, but that's a trade chip you got to cash in on. The Mets could get into the mix, but do they want to trade significant prospects for a rental? And a rental that last year was in a similar boat, got traded, and pitched really bad after the deadline. Now, Flaherty's a different pitcher this year than he was last year. Okay, he has been lights out in Detroit, striking out more batters. The velo's been up. He has been a much better pitcher than he was last season. With that said, very easy to put up great numbers in Comerica. It's a piece that you got to be a little bit wary of. Not to say the Mets shouldn't go for it. I think Jack Flaherty could start a playoff game for you, but he might cost a fairly significant return without an extra year of control. So while I think he's very likely to be moved, I don't necessarily believe the Mets are going to get in the bidding for him. Tyler Anderson is another one that I put into the boat of most likely to be moved. Now, he has another year next season where he's under control. It's a 3-year, $39 million deal, if I'm not mistaken. I know he's making about $13 million. And he's been very good this season, but the underlying numbers don't like him as much. The Mets already have 3 lefties in this rotation, and I don't think Tyler Anderson has better stuff than any of them. I think he can get by well. He's got experience, and he very well could be a solid piece as a depth starter. I would not rule that trade out. I could see him being more affordable on the market when it comes to the trade package to get him, where maybe that's the guy the Mets land on, but he would not be my preferred target. So most likely to be moved, not necessarily one that I would love the Mets getting. Getting to the biggest impact arms camp, I mentioned Snell already. Chris Bassett, I talked about on yesterday's show. I think that'd be a perfect fit for the Mets, but the Blue Jays are not going to trade him. At least that's what they've said publicly. Now, the Blue Jays could get blown away by an offer and decide, you know what, we are going to deal Chris Bassett because he's only got another year left after this season. He's older. He's not going to be part of a long-term future for us, but you're going to have to give something pretty significant to get him. Would I trade Luis Angel Acuna for Chris Bassett? I think I would, but would I attach much more to it? Probably not. Whereas with Blake Snell, I think I would deal Acuna and another fairly significant prospect. If it took Acuna and Blade Tidwell, I lose a lot of sleep over it, but I would be thinking about it. I would. And that shows you just the value of Snell. And that's crazy because Bassett, you're going to get the second year. That's the other part of it. Snell could be a rental. So I've said that already. I've thrown that sort of package out there as a possibility, as something that I think would move the needle for the Giants, and not that they would consider it. But I don't know if David Stearns would want to do that. And I could very well see him just saying, you know what, we're going to roll with David Peterson and Tyler McGill. And rightfully so. And if that's the case, you better get some help for that bullpen at least, because then you still can have that option on the table of sliding Budo into the rotation. If you don't address the bullpen further, you're going to rob Peter to pay Paul, whatever the expression is. But that's where you're at. So it really is tough to see the Mets making that big move for a Snell, for a Bassett, and for the third arm in this group, which is Garrett Crochet, because it's just going to require such a significant prospect return that I don't know if the Mets are willing to go that all in on this season. Now, you can argue that they should. And over the weekend, I've made that argument at times. This is a team that has a real chance to not only make the playoffs, but make a little bit of noise when they get there. You have Francisco Lindor playing at maybe a career best level over the last couple of months. He deserves, an investment in him. And yes, the contract is investment in him, but on the team that has really forced themselves into this race, he deserves that big trade at the deadline, but those trades can hurt. And all of the three guys in the big impact arm grouping, whether it's Bassett, who could fall off a cliff next year with his age and is getting paid a lot of money, whether it's Snell, who either you get unbelievable performance from him that could carry you, for a deep playoff run, but then he will absolutely opt out, or he doesn't pitch well and he's a question mark and an expensive one on your books next year. A lot of give and take on that. And Garrett Crochet, there's no telling if he's even going to pitch for the rest of this season. He said he wants to stay in the rotation all year, doesn't want to be moved to the bullpen. And if he's going to pitch in October, he wants an extension. Otherwise, he's shutting it down at the end of the season. Now, can things change on that? Sure, but that's a massive risk to take when it's going to require a big prospect return to get him. All of this leads me to our final four trade candidates that I have for you. Guys that are a little bit under the radar, more fit a depth starter type of a bucket than a huge impact arm, but guys that can help the Mets nonetheless, get them to the playoffs, and even potentially give them another viable starter in a playoff rotation. So I'm going to go through those list of names in the final segment here. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online with their easy-to-use website, which is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining Supply House's free Trade Master program, where every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/T-M and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, I have 4 starting pitchers that I think are really good trade candidates for the Mets, guys that wouldn't break the bank when it comes to prospects, that would help the Mets in a pretty significant fashion over the final 2 months, guys that I could see David Stearns sort of kicking the tires on and making some deals where it helps you. It doesn't blow you away, but it just gives you another arm you can slide into the back end of that rotation and get you to the playoffs. And I think that's all the Mets really care about here, getting into the dance, and then hopefully their bats are going to carry them. And there is still that hope that Kodai Senga, dealing with this calf strain, could get back at some point in October. The typical timetable is 8 to 10 weeks. That is the rest of this season. He has been placed on the 60-day IL to make room for Jesse Winker on the 40-man roster. But there is still a little bit of hope that he can progress, rehab that thing by the end of September. Maybe you can still see Kodai Senga come back, and it would just be this, all right, see what he looks like in the playoffs. He looks pretty good in that brief cameo. Maybe he still could be that ace that you need when the games matter the most. So if that's not something that they're going to bank on, but maybe the move for the Mets is just get there, get to the playoffs, and figure it out. Who knows? Maybe you see Christian Scott back in the rotation this season. Maybe Brandon Sproat makes a surprising, emergence in the Mets rotation. I wouldn't count on that. I think bullpen more likely, but we'll see. Let's get into these candidates, though. So the first one is the guy that has just been sort of put out on the market. Reports are the Rangers are listening, and that is Michael Lorenzen. Lorenzen has made 18 starts this year, has pitched to a 3.87 ERA in 97 and 2/3 innings pitched. Now, he doesn't strike out a lot of batters. His expected ERA is about a run higher than his actual ERA, 4.82. And he's a guy that got traded last year, went from the Tigers to the Phillies, did pitch a no-hitter, but looked really bad after that. So he's not the sexiest name, but he's a pitcher that you could acquire without giving up too much. He's a rental. He makes sense. That's a name where I'm like, oh, the Mets trade for Michael Lorenzen. He's better than Tyler McGill, slides into that 5th spot in your rotation, and helps you get through the final 2 months. I think it would be a fine addition. It wouldn't change lives, but it would be pretty solid. And let's just say in that trade, you can find yourselves a relief pitcher as well. Maybe you can get David Robertson back in the fold. All of a sudden, that would be more of a home run of a move for me if you could find a way to get some relief help in the deal as well. They have other pitchers, Kirby Yates. I don't know if they're going to deal him. Their closer, Jose Urena, has had a very good season pitching out of the bullpen, which is very shocking because he was not good as the starter. There are some potential arms that the Mets could get along with Lorenzen that would make that more of a splashy move, and arms that still wouldn't kill you when it comes to the prospects. We talked about the different lists, the buckets that I had when it comes to prospects. I'm going to do a video. I'm going to break up that segment of the show. You can still find it. That was the second show I did on Saturday morning, but I'm going to post that video to YouTube, 10 minutes, probably the segment where I broke down the prospect side of things. There was a couple lists there. There was the prospects I'd be ready to deal, which we've already talked about. And then there was would deal only in a blockbuster. Let's just say you had to trade Nolan McLean to get David Robertson and Michael Lorenzen. Nolan McLean being the former two-way player, has great stuff, but still a project, still a guy that has to be developed. If he's the headliner in a trade like that, I'm okay with it. If you have to give up Ronnie Mauricio and you get a really good reliever and a solid starting pitcher, I think I'd be okay with it because this team needs reinforcements. Brett Beatty, it would hurt. I don't think I would enjoy seeing that deal done, but I could understand it if it's the missing pieces to help a team get over the top. So there's, again, different buckets that you have to think of when it comes to prospects. And that's sort of how I have been categorizing it in my mind. And then there's the untouchables that you'd have to potentially give up if you're going to make the deal for a Crochet, for a Fetty, for a Snell that I just don't think the Mets are going to really entertain. So another guy that fits that same sort of package is Zach Littell. Littell is a pitcher on the Rays. They have been shopping everyone right now. And they're getting pitching back. So currently in their rotation, they have Littell, Taj Bradley, Shane Baz, Tyler Alexander, and Jeffrey Springs. And they're going to get back potentially Drew Rasmussen. I think he's on the mend. Ryan Pepiot, weird injury. He's got an infection in his knee from a spider bite. But I think he can probably come back this year. I'm not sure if Shane McClanahan is going to come back this season off of Tommy John or not. But the Rays are a team that are open for business. And Littell is in arbitration, has 1 year left after this deal. This is around the time that they would trade a guy like this. This is his one season where he has been in a rotation all year and got over 100 innings pitched. So this would be a time to sell high on him. He's got a 4.18 ERA. He did carve with the Mets, so he made a good impression in the one time that we saw him this year in a game. And he's got an expected ERA of 4.26. So he's been about what you'd expect. Strikeouts are decent, 8.29 per 9. So not quite a strikeout per inning, but close enough. Walks very low, under 2 per 9. So he's going to control the strike zone. He has good enough stuff to get some swing and miss. I think Zach Littell is maybe my favorite from this group of arms because I don't really know how much it takes to get him. You're always wary to trade with the Rays. Are they going to find that prospect in your system that's going to blossom? But you got to give to get, and you might be able to give a prospect that's further away, which the Mets might be more interested in. So maybe it is a guy that's still in the Dominican Summer League. You haven't invested a lot of resources in. Yes, those guys can become superstars, but they also can flop. And there's so much variance that you're more willing to trade a guy like that. And for the Rays, they have such a good farm system, such a deep 40-man roster that they like trading for guys that are far away because it helps their timeline with their constant roster churn. So I think Zach Littell is a very, very interesting trade candidate and a guy that you could see the Mets really end up pulling off here. And then you're like, oh, wow, they got Littell. And you probably like the trade more and more as it materialized. So I think that's a great fit. Two more I got. Cal Quantrill. Now, the Rockies are so weird. They never capitalize and trade when they should. They absolutely should be like the Marlins right now, like the Rays, like the White Sox will be. They haven't swung deals, but you know that they're going to. They should be shopping, and selling pieces because this is not their year. And Cal Quantrill under team control for next season. Apparently, there's been some contract extension talk, and he has pushed back on it. So you're not going to have him long-term. He's one of the few guys that have been able to go over there to Colorado and pitch at altitude and do well, but they should be dealing him. I just don't know if they will. He's got a 4.09 ERA in 21 starts, 114 and a third innings pitched. In those 21 starts, he has 12 quality starts. He'd be perfect for the Mets, honestly. A guy that could start a third playoff game for you, has a little bit of experience there. I just think Cal Quantrill is exactly what you should be looking for because it would not require a haul. He'd be a quality starting pitcher you can slide in that rotation. I'm just not sure if the Rockies will do it, which is just ridiculous. The final piece is one that I like a lot, but I don't want to see the Mets trade a ton for it or for him, and that's Trevor Rogers. Now, Trevor Rogers had a 2.64 ERA in 2021. I believe he was runner-up to Jonathan India in the Rookie of the Year race. Looked like a future star for the Marlins. You guys might remember him that year. He carved the Mets a couple times, had 157 strikeouts and 133 innings pitched. Since then, has not gone well for Trevor Rogers. Had an ERA over 5 in 2022. Last year, he was hurt. I think it was a shoulder injury. Only made 4 starts. This year, he's been healthy. He's made 21 starts, has a 4.53 ERA and 105 and a third innings pitched. 1.53 whip, which is not great. But there's upside here. Granted, his velo is down from that great season of 2021. It's down a couple miles per hour, but he has kicked the ball on the ground this year. He's a little bit more of a project, but do I think that Trevor Rogers has a heck of a lot more upside than Tyler McGill? Absolutely. You have him under control for 2 more seasons beyond this year. So that would be a move that you'd make where maybe the Marlins are willing to take a collection of prospects that are sort of C+, B- prospects. You don't have to give up a massive return, but you have to give up some guys that would help that really weak farm system in Miami and maybe they view Rodgers as a guy that is getting closer and closer to free agency. They have other arms. Max Meyer just came back up. They have Yuri Perez down with Tommy John, as with Sandy Alcantara. They have a longer window to think about. So if they're not even going to try to win next year either, and then Rodgers is a free agent, why not move him? The argument against it would be maybe Trevor Rodgers has a better season next year and you get more value either because he pitched well down the stretch and you could trade him in the offseason, or he has a great 2025 season and he becomes a valuable asset at that deadline. So I don't think they're just going to give him away. But let's just say the Marlins love Nick Morabito, guy that's had really good numbers in low A in particular and has been solid enough in high A this year. Maybe that's a prospect that they like as a headliner. Maybe as they have pretty much no catching prospects, although they just got one for Jazz Chisholm, but maybe they like Kevin Parada as a bat first catcher. All right, you put him in the deal. Maybe they're looking at Luke Ritter, who's had really good numbers in the minor leagues this season. You could plug into your lineup in the second half and just see what happens over the final couple of months. Maybe that's a piece that intrigues them, where all of a sudden you're packaging a bunch of stuff together and you might be able to make a move. Maybe they would want a Mike Vassell in that type of a trade instead of one of those guys as a, starting pitcher that has full control. They have all the years on him where he's close enough to the big leagues. Maybe call him up in the second half, see what you have. I could see Trevor Rodgers coming to the Mets. It would be the least attractive of these names because he hasn't been great this season, but there is upside. Maybe the Mets can make some tweaks and it could be a steal in the long run with the next couple of seasons where he does have that team control and he has shown a higher ceiling. So we'll see. That's one that I think could be moved, but the Marlins might be wise to hang on to him and see what they can get next year. So to recap, when it comes to the pie in the sky moves, Blake Snell, Chris Bassett, Garrett Crochet, when it comes to guys who are most likely to be moved, but I don't necessarily see the Mets being the final bidder on that they actually get these guys in, Eric Fetty, Jack Flaherty, Tyler Anderson, the four names that I would be really curious on that sort of fit the type of trade I could see David Stearns making: Michael Lorenzen, Trevor Rodgers, Zach Littell, and Cal Quantrill. And I would say of those names, I definitely think that Littell or Quantrill are my favorites because you have the extra year of control. I think they're very quality starting pitchers. Lorenzen is a rental, but I think a better option than Rodgers for this team. And we'll see if the Mets swing any of those deals or if David Stearns finds somebody that I'm not even thinking about, and that is probably the most likely route. But we got a couple more days here of deadline watch to figure out what's going to happen. It's one of the most exciting times of the season. We will see where the chips fall. Appreciate all of you for tuning into the show today. Of course, we're talking about tomorrow. More deadline stuff. The Mets are going to start a series against the Twins. So we'll recap whatever happens on Monday night and whatever happens on the market. As always, as I already said, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. The goal is to get to 10,000 subs by the end of the season. So I appreciate all of you who subscribe. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.